My name is Boulevard, and you must be here for my Call of the Mountain spoiler review up until this point. Leona just came out today. Call of the Mountain releases next week. I'll have a full spoiler review then, but I kind of wanted to touch on everything that has been spoiled up until this point, just so that I can kind of get a head start on it, not do as much in my actual set review. Videos have been slow this week because I casted Tuesday and Wednesday, so these weekday casts are starting to screw up the feng shui of my YouTube schedule, but hey, it's all good, right? I'm still doing something. So the supporting stuff out of Targon is the Targon stuff that I'm the least interested in. I don't think it's super amazing. I think that the decision trees aren't that interesting, especially something like Mountain Sojourner. Like, there's not a whole lot of decision making going into what you're actually supporting. It's generally going to be very clear. War Chef is a little bit different because it's like such an incremental thing that sometimes you have to manage your stats a little bit differently. Maybe this kind of stuff comes out to be the same way, and you do get some of those initial interesting tree lines like you did out of Bannerman, but after a while they become pretty streamlined. You can tell pretty obviously. But I also just don't think this is extremely good, especially with the Leona spell that just came out that silences a unit and butt blasted back to Kingdom Come. But the problem I have with the archetype as a whole is that if you ever lose control of the board, it looks like your deck is going to fumble. Because all of your units are understated because they have the support keyword, you really need to have 2 units out, sometimes 3 units if you're running something like Mountain Sojourner, in order to be an effective deck, and that can be difficult to do. Sure, you have Bastion to go ahead and protect you from a couple of things, but Bastion working like barrier means that there is play around to it. It's not a deny, it's not a catch-all. I can Vile Feast to pop that, I can Blade's Edge to pop that out. I would not be the most surprised in the world to start to see Blade's Edge pop up just to counter things like Bastion, depending on how much that card does take over the format, because I don't think Targon's bad. I think that the support archetype out of Targon is bad. Not that Taric himself is bad either, but my problem with Taric is that, and if you're not running the support archetype, he's never going to level. Maybe you can get him with the target, and I'll talk about that in a second when I get back to a card that I glossed over. But as far as the actual support stuff, I'm not impressed by it. Taric, especially now with the silence spell existing, you know, you want to be casting spells onto Taric to get them down onto his supported ally as well. Generally, you're going to be looking for like Blessing of Targon or something along those lines, just to, you know, buff up Taric, buff up your other unit, and then Ruination can come out, and suddenly I've gotten 3 cards out of you, especially if I just like block Taric and his supporting unit with a Spiderling, or even just the supporting unit. I take 5 damage from the Taric, I don't take any damage from the other thing. Sure, no damage goes down on your guys, but as long as I can kill them after the fact, it doesn't really matter to me. It's really going to come down to how impactful is Bastion, but I don't think this is necessarily the best deck for Bastion to be in. So overall, just not a fan of the support stuff. I think that if it loses the board, it loses too easily, and, you know, maybe I'm oversimplifying this and that it is actually very difficult for this deck to lose the board, but that's not really what we've been seeing so far. Sure, they all have high health, you know, maybe that is something playing for them that I'm not giving them credit for, but I mean, even just the cost on them doesn't seem to be amazing. There's, what, like 3 support units that we've seen so far? Yeah, then the other ones go into Ionia, and all of a sudden, like, if you're locked into Targon Ionia, sure, you have Deny, sure, you have Bastion, maybe that's enough, but do you actually outstat Bannerman on your defensive turns? I don't think the answer is yes. So then, Arbiter of the Peak. I look at Arbiter of the Peak, and I go, okay, if Plaza Guardian never saw play, why would this card ever see play? And then it all clicked together. Are you ready for this? So you take these garbage little gem generators, right? And you build a Piltover Zon deck and you put J Medarda in it. And then you constantly target J Medarda with your gems and you cycle through your deck 10 cards at a time, dumping your entire turn into gemming J Medarda. And what does that do? Oh, that's right. Not only does it feed the fuel for Arbiter of the Peak, but also Plaza Guardian. So you go a J Medarda Turbo, Arbiter, Plaza Guardian deck, and that's how you play Arbiter of the Peak. Otherwise, like, I don't think this is going to see play in, like, supporter decks. It's not bad, you know, if you've leveled Taric solely off of, well, actually, no, if you've leveled Taric in general, then Arbiter of the Peak is going to be a 3-mana 6/6 Overwhelm, which ain't nothing. So maybe maybe this card having 2 different things that you can do with it in terms of cost reduction makes me undervalue it, but, like, I really don't like the gem stuff. It's not, I don't love it. I definitely don't love it. I kind of like Mentor of the Stones. It's got a really good support effect. It's got a good last breath. Like, I could see Mentor of the Stones seeing play in some things, but I just don't really like the idea of all-inning on this supporter thing. I don't really like Shards of the Mountain, just because the gems are 1 cost. One of my friends had asked me about Cloud Drinker, especially if you are enticed to go into Ionia organically, because that's where the other support cards are. And you have to play 7 gems before Cloud Drinker was cost effective. Because like if you just play a 6 mana card and then play 6 gems, like you could have just played the 6 gems for the 6 mana that you spent on the Cloud Drinker. Sure, you get to spread it out over the course of a couple of turns, but I'm not sure that on a deck building level that something like that is worth it. So, I mean, even if it turns out to be good, I don't really like the support stuff. I don't think it's going to be that great, but I mean, this is a game that is kind of light on its removal. So, I mean, like, leveled Taric is undeniably a good card, right? Like, me and my ally not being able to die or take damage this round, that's great. Almost makes me want to put it in, like, Bilgewater or Demacia so I can get some rally effects off with it, but you know, I think that Ionia is probably the route that you're going to go if you're all in on the support thing. And the fact that the Silence and Blastaguy spell is slow speed does mean that you can't even do it to Tark in combat. So, I mean, yeah, it's potential that the support deck is just so good on offense that it doesn't need a good defense, because right now it is looking not phenomenal on defense. That is sort of the weakness of the support mechanic. And the question is, how easy is it to exploit that weakness? Personally, I think it's relatively easy. Not like, you know, it's not like a blowout in every matchup. It's not like this is like a tier 5 deck, but I don't think it's necessarily going to like take over the meta. In Ionia, I like the support stuff a little bit more, namely Lulu, because of things like elusives. You know, getting down a Greenglade duo on turn 2, followed by a Lulu, seems very, very good. I get to hit you for 4 elusive damage. Like, anytime you're looking at stuff like stat buffing things in Ionia, you have to think, like, elusives has to be the first thing that comes to your mind, right? So, Young Witch, kind of whatever. I mean, it's an elusive unit on its own, so that's pretty cool. And if we are going to see a lot of elusive mirrors, then the quick attack does matter, so maybe we could see this come out. It is a pretty prime Lulu target as well. It gives the card inherent defense, and then it gives defense over to, or rather survivability over to another unit, because it does give it quick attack. Flower Child, I don't think is anything, at least in an elusive deck. Like, maybe you play it in the supporting Taric deck, but like, this is another thing, like, I don't really care about playing this in elusives. Sure, you can play it in the support deck, I guess, but, like, I'm very bad at evaluating the support cards because I don't respect the archetype. This one's kind of cool. I don't think it's going to find its way into any deck. Any late game deck that's looking for the lifesteal generally goes for Emerald Awakener. And sure, obviously, like, it gets more lifesteal in the early game, but I think that people really value the game-ending potential and the massive life swings of the turn 10 Emerald Awakener, so I don't think Tasty Fae folks going to see play in anything. Lulu's also pretty easy to self-level. Like, if you are playing an elusive deck with just Lulu and Young Witch, it's actually not unreasonable for you to go ahead and just level the Lulu. Lulu, while she's a pretty primo target for removal, does mean that your opponent isn't throwing removal at your elusives, which is sort of the one win condition that you are playing towards. And she does sort of demand it, you know, growing a unit to a 5/5, getting up to that 4 HP, creating a Hello Pix at the start of every round is pretty valuable. It really dissuades your opponent from from developing into an attack, because if they go, oh, you know, I'm going to play a unit, then you go, okay, well, I'm going to give my Kinku Lifeblade Barrier, and now you can't attack her. I'm just going to gain 2 life, and oh, that's right, I can continue to develop because this is a burst speed spell. Even though I can't play it in combat, like, I still get to play it in my main phase and then hold priority and play something else if I want to. I don't like picks. Fey Guide, I don't think is great. I mean, we don't really see Sumpwork maps see play. I think a 4-mana 3/3 that grants something elusive. This is something you'd see more in, like, a Swain deck or a Yasuo deck. I don't think this goes in, like, the support deck, but it could. I mean, like, an elusive Taric really doesn't mean anything, right? Because Taric doesn't take damage anyway. Like, this is something you would want to throw on the Swole Squirrel. So the Trundle stuff looks cool, the Behold stuff, but I'm not super convinced on it, especially because it does mean that, like, you have to be holding a dead card in hand. The dragon stuff in Hearthstone was a little bit different because you could hold a dragon of any cost and the upsides were pretty extreme. Meanwhile, Faces of the Old Ones is like just 1 less mana than Warding Stones, and Warding Stones is a 2 additional HP and doesn't require me to have a dead card in hand. Like, even if I am playing a Behold deck, am I playing Faces of the Old Ones over Warding Stones? Why would I not play both? Because that's really bad. The top end of Freljord isn't really there for you to play that much ramp. I don't think there's any top end in Legends of Runeterra that entices me to play that much ramp. At least if Freljord is one of my regions. Because anytime I think, oh, I want to ramp really hard, like, the first thing that comes into my head is I want to play Dreadway into Ledros, but I mean, if I'm in Freljord, I can't do that. I mean, yeah, I've heard a lot of talk about it potentially being a Behold aggro deck. I think that that's pretty inconsistent given the starting hand size. I'm trying to think if we ever saw, like, dragon aggro decks, and I think we did for a little bit in Priest when, like, the deck first came out, where you could, like, play a 2/3 into a 2/4 with Taunt into, I think it was, like, a 3/4 or some nonsense on turn 3. like that made a little bit more sense, but because of the development of both, like the turn order of Legends of Runeterra really takes away a lot of the comparisons from Hearthstone in terms of early tempo. But what I do know is that 2 mana units with 3 HP are good. I'm just not convinced that the Behold strategy necessarily keeps up. I do like regeneration though. I've been singing the praises of regeneration for quite some time. I think it is one of, if not the best keywords in the game. Like, there are only 3 cards in the game front side with regen, I think. 4 now that I keep forgetting about She Who Wanders because they buffed her to have regen again recently, and she hasn't, like, her playability hasn't really picked up since then. So it's Garen, Braum, Scar Maiden Reaver, I think the 4 mana, or the 5 mana 4/5 in Freljord, and backside Vladimir and She Who Wanders. So there's only 2 followers with regeneration. Obviously, one of them is 10 mana. The other one has Overwhelm, and it's only got 5 HP. It's not a big thing. We haven't really gotten to see how good regen is on followers. There's nothing that grants regeneration in Legends of Runeterra up until this point, so I think this is the part where we actually get to explore the keyword and see how good it is. And, I mean, given how difficult Garen is to deal with, I think that the keyword is very good. Granted, Garen you want to deal with for other reasons. He's got a little bit less things that can hurt him, actually, because he is a champion. And, you know, obviously the fact that a level Garen will nearly end the game because it's a 6/6 that's rallying every turn. Maybe on followers it's just not as good, but I've always really liked the regeneration keyword, especially in Freljord where you have health buffs to sort of steal away the opportunities for your opponent to kill those units. You know, if you do want to throw 2 spells at my 5 health unit to try and kill it, and then I throw out an Elixir of Iron, that feels pretty good for me. So maybe the tempo of the regen afforded to the Freljord region will actually turn this into a strategy, but I don't think you necessarily have to play the Behold stuff to do that. Asgard the Ancient, I actually think is like a pretty cool top-end card for Freljord. I think that this would probably even make its way into some of the War Mother's Call decks. Maybe not. Maybe you have a Nivea to control the board and that's enough, but I think that Asgard is just a really cool card. Maybe he won't see play, but I kind of hope that he does. Troll Chant is actually like pretty good. This is like a huge attack swing. This really plays well for mid-range. Like maybe mid-range Frostbite starts to play this card, but probably not. I think that the deck list for that kind of deck is already really tight, and I'm not sure that this is better than Fury of the North. But I could see it maybe replacing Elixir of Iron, depending on how the meta shakes out, but also probably not, because the 1 mana difference is impactful. Is the -2 attack worth it? Maybe, actually. I could see metas in situations where this is better than Elixir of Iron. Obviously, like, it's straight up better because it gives a -2, but like the 1 mana is a difference maker. My problem with Trundle is like he doesn't really do much. Like the Ice Pillar is kind of cool. Why did they not put Ice Pillar next to Trundle? Hold on. This picture quality is so low, but you know what Ice Pillar does. I like Ice Pillar. It's not great, but I like it. With regen, like, it's actually a pretty cool strategy. You try to take over like this board-centric stuff. The fact that it can't come down until turn 8 is kind of a pain, because it means your Trundle is like hard locked on when it can level, kind of like Karma. And, like, it doesn't really cost you anything, right? You just Ice Pillar, you refill your 8 mana, it doesn't really matter. And then your Trundle gets the level if it's still on field. I think, like, running out multiple Trundles together is actually going to be really good. Like, if you can get down 2 Ice Pillars, that feels like a really good shot at controlling the board, especially with all of the regen and Overwhelm. And it looks like you're going to start to, like, just chip away at your opponent's board while you're chipping away at their life total. It might be a little bit too slow of a strategy, a little bit too board-centric. We have seen Freljord board-centric decks struggle with Shadow Isle decks in the past, like 1 Ruination, and suddenly you're blown out, because a lot of the ways that you garner card advantage is just by beating up your opponent's board. So something like a Ruination does just, you know, completely wipe your board. You don't actually have ways for your hand to start to regain value, but like maybe this is the new Trifarian Assessor kind of deck, which doesn't necessarily feel like the case to me, just because you are playing such a high curve. You don't get the Assessor. Like, Assessor is such a streamlined card. We've only ever seen it have success in 1 deck, and that's because that deck plays 2 mana units with 5 attack. And even then can struggle to get the Assessor off. If you're not shitting out 5 attack units until like turn 5, your Assessor is way too late. You should have already taken over the game at that point, and Assessor feels more like a backup plan than the proactive win condition that it does like in Frostbite midrange. And sure, you know, you could throw the Trifarian Assessor into a deck like this. Maybe we take the Frostbite out of Frostbite midrange, we turn it into like regen midrange. We still play the Noxus package that we do right now of Trifarian Glory Seeker, Trifarian Assessor, Culling Strike, because Iceveil Archer's still going to be a good card, right? Especially because, you know, I want to play my Iceveil Archers early to play defensively so that I can get into my late game turn, so that I can start to take over the board with these high health units. The problem is, like, elusives exist, and with the vulnerable, the Ice Pillar not coming down until turn 8, you know, it's very possible that you just die to aggro decks in the meantime. I don't like Icequake. Augur of the Old Ones, I think, is like actually like sleeper insane. Being able to give an ally Overwhelm and regen just like curves really well in a lot of things. If you are playing a Behold deck, I would imagine that Augur, I could see you not playing 3 of it just because it is a 6-drop, and it's possible that a lot of cards in the Behold deck already have Regen or Overwhelm anyway. But if you could find a way to slot this into like Frostbite midrange, I think this card's absolutely insane. The problem is, like, generally in Frostbite midrange, the only 8+ cost card you're playing is Captain Pharaon. A couple of them have started to play like 1 copy of Tryndamere, but I don't think this like organically slots into there. Maybe it does because it's just a 6-mana Regen Overwhelm on its own. Like, this is one of the cards that I'd be okay playing without its upside. Just because, like, you know, a vanilla 5/5 with Overwhelm Regen does seem pretty good to me. And if I do happen to get that upside and I can get this down onto, like, an Avaroshan Hearthguard, that feels absolutely insane. But I think because you have to Behold, and because so many of the Behold cards already fit into the keywords that this card gives to it, you know, maybe it's not just going to find... Maybe this is just, like, a really powerful in a vacuum card that doesn't find a home. I don't really care about Broadbacked Protector. Revitalizing Roar, like, I've tried to find cool combos with this, but as I had mentioned, the top end in Freljord's pretty mediocre, and when you're looking at like late game combos or things like, oh, I want to turn this into 0 mana, you're mostly looking at cards, like 2-card combos that exist outside of Freljord, and because you have to wait for the Enlightenment turn to reduce the card's cost to 0, you're not actually accelerating into anything, so it's kind of like, whatever, I don't think this is going to see play. Unless there's like some combo that comes out within one deck on its own, like maybe you play this in Sejuani Swain, and you make it so that you can reduce your Leviathan to 0 so that you can get a Swain and Leviathan out in the same turn. Maybe that's a space that this exists in, but we don't really see a lot of Sejuani Swain. I don't think that's kind of the archetype we would go back towards after Targon, so we'll have to see how that one actually works out. Resplendent Stellacorn's pretty cool. I don't know enough about the Targon region to tell you whether or not this card's going to see play. If you watched one of my casts earlier this week, you heard me talk about how I don't really like the Nightfall cards. The problem is that if you're looking to build an old school Fearsome deck with some of these cards, like this has Fearsome for 1 turn, this doesn't have Fearsome, and the curve for the Fearsome deck is already pretty cut and dry. The Dusk Rider, you know, maybe it can get enough value, but I really don't like the Nightfall cards. We'll have to see what Nightfall cards come out of Targon a little bit later on to kind of determine that one, but typically, if you are running one of the old school Fearsome style decks, then like Wraithcaller is a big part of that, which means you're running, if you're sane, at most 6 Targon cards. How, like, those Nightfall cards have to be real good for me when I want to fit those in there. Passage Unearned, total sideboard card. I don't think this ever sees main deck play, just because, like, this is never gonna get you advantage. If your opponent plays Harrowing and you play this, you still traded a card for a card. Sure, you're up on tempo, but you're not actually gaining card advantage off of this, and it has such fringe playability and such fringe scenarios where it comes up, and most of them are against Shadow Isle decks, that I don't think you can main deck this card, especially on ladder. But as we all know, I don't care about ladder. Everything I've said so far only refers to tournament. Encroaching Shadows is busted. I'm worried about this card because Leona just came out, and a Leona deck should like hard Goomba stomp any Encroaching Shadows deck, because you can't open attack in an Encroaching Shadows deck because you don't have a board. Everything is stunned, or everything has ephemeral, so everything dies at end of turn. Drought of Darkness, like, it's good for Nightfall. I also think it's not bad for like Hecarim decks. Like, we could see this in the Fearsome deck anyway, just because they do like to not go for open attacks, and getting the Spell Shield down proactively does mean that like your Hecarim guarantees an attack, which means that 9 power is coming out onto the board. Your opponent can't do anything about that, because typically Will of Ionia and Thermogenic Beams were the ways that we were seeing Hecarim dealt with immediately. And even if you stun Hecarim, you know, that's probably one of the least effective units in the game to stun, because he still gets his Spectral Riders. And I talked a lot about Nocturne on cast, where like I think that Nocturne's just good without the level. Like, I don't think you ever play to level the Nocturne. I think that you can just put this in a Fearsome deck and not feel bad about that. He's a 5/3. Like, he's just a 5/3 Fearsome. The only 4-drop that we're typically seeing in the Fearsome decks was Wraithcaller, so having this sort of backup card, especially since Wraithcaller lost his Fearsome, if you do find yourself in a position for, against Deep, for example, they have a very vulnerable to Fearsome early game with the Dreg Dredgers and the Thorny Toad, and sometimes even Hapless Aristocrat, where if you look at your opponent's board turn 4 and you go, okay, I actually really just want to play a Fearsome unit here, my Wraithcaller will only be a 2/2, I think that there is a lot of space for you to want to play Nocturne over the Wraithcaller on turn 4. But I don't think like you necessarily need to go for the Nocturne level for this card to be good. And even then, like, Nocturne, once he's on board, is not a high priority removal target for your opponent when you have other things in the deck that are slowly gaining value. For like Callista, for example, Callista's probably the highest priority target. Nocturne might be the second highest priority target if you are only playing a couple of champions. I think like the spread could very reasonably be something like 3 Callista, 1 Nocturne, 2 Hecarim, or something along those lines. You get what I'm saying. But yeah, I don't think you ever actually go for the Nocturne level. And if you do get the Nightfall off on him, he does actually, you know, give you a lot of opportunity to go for lethal, especially if you go like Skitterer into Nocturne. Like that could be a game-ending late game play for the fearsome deck, and maybe that's why they don't play Hecarim. Maybe they go 3 Nocturne so that you have those late game plays available to you. But he almost operates as like a mini Sejuani, and Sejuani, very, very good. So yeah, like if you can get the Nightfall off on Nocturne, awesome. The problem with that is that, and my problem with Nightfall as a whole in the fearsome deck, is that the fearsome decks typically play very on curve. You know, you're not banking spell mana unless you missed a turn, and even then, you're typically banking 2 spell mana, and you want to save that for something like Glimpse Beyond to dodge removal. But we'll see. I do like Nocturne, though. I just don't think a Nightfall deck is where he's going to find his home. Look at this. Look at how good this is. It's irrelevant. You're never going to get this. I like Unspeakable Horror a lot. I think that there's a lot of space for this to replace Vile Feast in a lot of decks, but I don't think it's going to be a blanket removal for or a blanket replacement for Vile Feast, because that 1/1 Spiderling does actually come up a lot. Risen Mist is cool. Anytime you can get a burst speed unit, we've seen it be completely insane, but overall I don't think this is like 4 mana for a Mist Wraith even at burst speed. I don't necessarily know is what I want to be doing. But hey, you know, I could be wrong. Just getting burst speed attackers seems really good. You know, not having to actually pass priority while developing a unit makes for a very appealing top deck, but overall, I'm not like super sold on it. It depends on how much of the late game you want to sacrifice out of decks like these. Like how quickly can you actually close a game with a fearsome deck? I think that we'll see this in like early iterations, and then maybe it'll fall off as people start to develop decks that just have more organic fearsome blockers, and you need more of a late game in the deck. Stalking Shadows seems really good. I know that I think it was Topher had mentioned just putting this in like the current version of Endure Spiders. And like obviously I've been talking a lot about my perception of the meta and what it's going to look like, and like these are the very obvious decks, and then obviously like there's a lot of non-obvious decks that someone's going to make that's like a completely unique deck, but I can only speak to what the current meta looks like and what the sort of obvious decks are. But speaking to the current meta, like Stalking Shadows does slot beautifully into Endure Spiders. And then finally, to finish it off, we have all of the Daybreak cards. I'm not really looking to like tell you what all these cards do. If you clicked on this video, I'm assuming that you know what all these cards do. Instead, I just want to talk about Leona herself and sort of the implications for a card like this in meta, in the tournament meta. So I don't like the idea of going into a sideboard meta because of Leona. I think that baseline, she's got a really good matchup into a lot of board-centric decks, just based off of the Daybreak thing as well. You know, it's not always easy for you to end the game with open attacks, especially if I am still building up a board in the meantime. And Leona really dissuades my opponent from not going for open attacks, especially with Morning Light. If I have a leveled Leona and then play Morning Light, then I'm stunning 2 of your units, and I think that's going to be the finisher for the Leona deck. Like, it's possible that Leona decks are actually just good because Leona herself is so good. She is in Targon, so you do have Bastion available to you to have protection for her, on top of the fact that she's got a health line that will never die to removal. And I think this like, good luck trying to play an Encroaching Shadow deck day 1 if someone has brought a Leona deck day 1. Like, your units just don't function all of a sudden. Even if it's elusives, like you play an elusive, I play a card, all of a sudden your elusive gets stunned. Sure, you can try to overwhelm me with the elusives that you have brought. The problem is that things like Ravon, Daylight, Spear exist so that it's always day for us, which I believe means that anytime I play a Daylight card, I will be stunning your unit. And with something like Zenith Blade being able to give me multiple Daylight cards in one turn, or I guess Daybreak card? Yeah, Daybreak cards in one turn. Things aren't looking great for you. And of course, Sunburst, just a phenomenal card. Guiding Touch, I don't know if this is going to see play in much. It's not impossible, you know, 2 mana heal, 2 draw card. That's actually quite a bit, especially if you are struggling with aggro decks. So this could be something that helps Targon get into the late game. Not that what we've seen out of Targon so far implies that 1, they're going to have a problem getting to the late game, or 2, they have anything to do in that late game. So Guiding Touch does seem like a little bit of a weird card to be in the Targon region. But overall, I actually like, the more I look at Leona, the more I like Leona. It's a little bit more combo based than something like Banner Moon, but I mean, the stats of the units, even without the Daybreak, are solid. Like, this specifically makes me want to reevaluate the Elite tag as a whole and how much we consider that an upside. And by we, I do mean Riot Games and how they want to start balancing these cards. For example, Sithri of Cloudfield is a 1 mana 2/2 Elite, and the Elite is considered to be the upside, but I think that Daybreak, give me +1/+1 this round, is a much bigger upside. You also look at Jagged Butcher, has the same thing. I just think that the Elite tag is extremely outdated to be considered an upside, and I think that that's something Riot's going to have to take a look at later on, but it's also something that I'm pretty sure they're never going to take a look at, because why would they? They don't have to. Nobody really cares about it that much that, like, you have to do something about it. But, I mean, I think that if you put every single Daybreak card in your deck, I don't think it necessarily feels like forced. I think that the Daybreak cards are all actually just very good on their own. I'm curious to see which of the Daybreak cards actually go into a non-Leona deck. I think that a few of these have potential. I'm trying to think of which ones now that I'm like actually looking through all of them. I mean, Sunburst obviously can go in any Targon deck. Yeah, actually looking at all these other ones, they are just a little bit too synergistic with the Daybreak things themselves. Like this, I mean, what deck really cares about playing a 6-mana 8/7 Overwhelm? I would say probably just a Leona deck, because you're at that point you're looking for like a board-centric Targon deck, right? I'm not even sure that this makes it into the Sunburst deck. I think that you're going to go a little bit more on the go wide, try to finish off the game with a leveled Leona and a Leona's Morningstar type plan, so maybe Sun Guardian doesn't even make it into something like that, but I didn't want to focus too much on these cards, just the general strategy as a whole, and overall I actually really like the Leona. I'm not going to say that it's going to replace Bannerman, but I'm going to say it seems like the most likely thing that I've seen in a long time to have the potential to replace Bannerman. Nab also goes for this board-centric kind of strategy. The problem is, like, you can't replace Bannerman because of the way that tournaments work out. I mean, sure, on ladder you can see a large decline in Bannerman, but in tournaments, because of the way that we do things, you know, having that mono region available to you was always very appealing, especially if you had some leftover not so desirable regional combinations. But now we're at a point where we have 8 regions. You can feasibly build 4 2-region decks, so maybe this is the point where Bannerman starts to fall out. And from my understanding, we're not getting any Demacia cards this set, so that actually seems more and more likely the more I think about it. I believe we'll be getting the Demacia cards in 2 months in October when the next sort of mini expansion drops. But yeah, that's about it. If I overlooked a card, it's because I don't care about it. I don't think it's impactful in any way. I think I've touched on just about everything I want to touch on. Zenith Blade is really cool because if you've got Day always active thanks to Raven Daylight Spear, then you can just triple Zenith Blade on turn 6 and end a game by giving 3 units Overwhelm and stunning another 3 units on your opponent's board. Overall, I really like Leona. But yeah, that's actually just going to do it for the video. Unfortunately, not a lot of time to like edit this one, make it high quality, as I'm casting a lot. I have big casts coming up this weekend. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter from the BLVD, figure out when and where that's happening every weekend. Or if you just want to follow my Twitch from the Boulevard, so I have it set up to auto-host anytime my co-caster goes live. So anytime I am casting, you should be able to catch it on my Twitch channel. The problem is, I don't think it gives you a notification if my Twitch channel is hosting someone. So I'll kind of have to figure out that. But yeah, follow me on Twitter from the BLVD. That'll tell you when and where I'm casting every weekend. If you want to figure out the specifics. Otherwise, if you just want to check out twitch.tv shit just works, that's SC8. I'll have a link to it down below. Every Saturday and Sunday, 2 p.m., you'll pretty much find us casting something, as well as some other times throughout the week. And might even do Southeast Asia this week. So, you know, check me out on Twitter for sure from the BLVD. Figure out when and where I'll be doing that, because I might just be casting like 5 tournaments this weekend. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching and good luck in your tournaments.